Não estou escutando, vou escutar diretamente na live, tá? It's in the defense of the territories in Brazil and internationally, among other reasons, due to the very worrying increase of wildcat miners in the indigenous territories of which they belong. This event is programmed for an hour and a half, and our objective here is to discuss the issue about wildcat mining, but which is often not given a lot of attention, which is the relation between impacts of wildcat mining. This one will have 10 to 15 minutes for their speak, and then we'll open for questions, and we will do a final round of answers and then close. So I would like to pass the word to Alessandra. She's the president of the Association Puriri of the Middle Tapajós River. She's also the vice coordinator of the Federation of Indigenous People of Pará, FEPIP, an indigenous national leader, very important in the current context. So, Alessandra, I would like to thank you for being here. Welcome, and the floor is yours. Good morning, everyone. As Vivian already presented me, we women, we decided to talk a bit about what's happening in our territories and outside of that. Today, believe that how their children and often their men are also being co-opted by the miners. But there is an incentive of the federal government, and there are incentives from the bills, the 9-1, that incentivizes wildcat mining. What we've been discussing as Indigenous leaders is that within the Indigenous territories that are demarcated, the homologated Indigenous lands, so within the constitution, it's law. There should not be any invasions in demarcated territories, and suddenly lots of non-Indigenous people are entering our territories. There is a bit of discussion about the bill 910 about the wildcat, about mining in Indigenous lands. But what about the Indigenous lands that are not fully demarcated? What happens if it's the first report has been published, but it's not fully demarcated? There are many attacks that are focused on these territories. So there are companies from outside that are attacking our territories. Recently, in Roraima, when they said that prohibited the burning of machinery that's been apprehended. There's also the example of the decree in Pará, which declared the day of the wildcat miner. So I get very worried when other countries are also involved, and that when others from outside think that governors in the Amazon will save the Amazon. there are no governors that are saving the Amazon. It's us who are protecting the forest. Every day we are being attacked. The attack on the murder of Dom is an example of, it's a very famous journalist who was murdered together with Bruno, the indigenous. And so what happened to them, what's been happening, we've been denouncing this for a long time. Do we who are in this fight need to die as well? Recently, we saw that the environmental secretaries of the states passed new laws as well that facilitated mining in indigenous lands. And the persons that work on the environmental secretaries, they go outside into different events outside and say they're saving the Amazon, doing all these good things. But this is happening there. We denounce so often things within Brazil and outside, but making any denunciation in Brazil doesn't really change anything. We feel like a little ant trying to change things. So we have to go to internationally to denounce things that are happening. The fishermen in our villages, they can't fish anymore. Fishermen are invading our territories as well. So many fishermen are going to different territories to be able to fish, but this violence related to the fishermen, where does it come from? It comes from incentives from the government itself. And when we denounce this, the UN itself said it's not going to talk to the government, but the government is lying about what they're doing. And we, the women, the children, our elder are suffering. We see our sacred lands being attacked by big infrastructure projects, by loggers, by wildcat miners, and nobody sees this. And we see this the whole time. The water is being contaminated by mud. Our children are swimming in contaminated rivers. They go swim in this river that makes your skin itch. It's very easy to speak about environment if you don't feel if you don't feel personally what the impacts are. We have been having an increased number of abortions, spontaneous abortions. And why does this happen? Because there's a lot of mercury in the land, which brings a lot of disease. And many mayors are saying that we should legalize wildcat mining, but that should not happen because it brings a lot of disease, a lot of violence, it brings prostitution, and we are feeling this every day. And these impacts, the women see that they're losing their children because of the wildcat mining, because of other projects that are arriving inside our territories. This is when people don't understand what the Amazon is, when they think that the Amazon is just a forest. But it's important to know that there are people that live inside of the Amazon that need public policies to protect the Amazon and protect indigenous people. We need education, we need healthcare. The women are planting and they're harvesting, and they earn their money like that. And it's not wildcat mining that brings us income. Today we have our youth is making documentaries and they're getting prizes for that, and that's very good. It's very important these territories are built within the territories, that they're built with our communities, not only coming from outside top down. We don't, and definitely not a death project that comes from outside, because that's what's happening now in Brazil. It's projects being implemented top down that are bleeding, that are murdering our indigenous peoples. This is happening with the Kiowa, with the Yanomami, with other peoples. It's a massacre. It's a genocide that's happening. Even so, we are resisting, and we will continue to resist. The women that enter in the front line of this fight, they are always ready to fight. They're always ready to take their children and go to fight for their rights. Because this is what's happening today. The women are leaving our territories with their women, sometimes pregnant women. They go to the fight. And many fear, because to fear this fight, but it's life that is that's being challenged. We have to fight. Thank you, Alessandra. Can we pass the word to Erika, Indigenous Association of Women of Yanomami, Association Kumiyoma, and the Yanomami people. In May, they published a report that's very comprehensive about what it means, what the impacts are that Yanomami are suffering from the wildcat miners in their territory. Yanomami under attack, that's the name of the report. You can find it in English and Portuguese in the link that we're sharing in the chat. So, Eric, I would like to ask you to comment a little bit about this report and share with us the conclusions of the report and about the impacts on health, security, on safety, about drugs, guns, sexual exploitation, which are happening inside the Yanomami territory and which are a direct impact from the invasion of these wildcat miners. Thank you. So I've been presented. I'm Erika Yanomami. We have a little problem with Erica's internet. I think the internet fell. So maybe we can do the following while we wait for Erica. We can hopefully resolve the issues of internet. Juma, do you agree? So we can give Eric a little time to come back to the live. Oh, she's back. Internet broke down. So I've been presented. I'm Erika Yanomami, president of the Yanomami Women Association. I fight in the name of the Yanomami people against illegal gold mining within the indigenous lands, where my people, the Yanomami, are suffering, especially women. We suffer a lot in the places where the miners have been implemented in the indigenous lands. The women are and they're being sexually abused. They're being sexually abused, and the mining also brought a lot of suffering for children. There are many children are dying from malnutrition, and malaria is also killing a lot of indigenous children. And there are many things that should not happen with the Yanomami people. This is very worrying that we're having within the indigenous Yanomami lands this situation, and we women who are on the front lines, this is what we're finding to us. Because we, Yanomami, we suffer a lot. The land and the forest that we live on, we can't live without it. We can't live without the forest. The forest is our home. So we survive in the forest, and it's with the forest that we live. The forest is our life. So that's why we are fighting, because without the land, nobody will survive. Because we live on the land and we know how to take care of it. That's what I like to share. I'm here from the Pico da Neblina region, but it's for our future that I'm in this fight, to avoid expansion of wildcat mining within our lands, as is happening with our brothers and sisters in Roraima. And I don't want this to happen in the region of Makuraka. So as a leader, female leader, I'm in this struggle, in this fight with my brothers and sisters in Roraima, and I can also speak in their name, because it's a lot of suffering for the indigenous people. So women, we are together in this. And I hope you can all support our Yanomami struggle. Thank you. It's very worrying. The prostitution, which we didn't have before, our ancestors, there was never prostitution within our communities, but this is now very bad and very serious here with us Yanomami women, and this should not happen. We are all in this fight against illegal mining. The rivers in which the children swim our rivers are being polluted by the illegal wildcat mining, and these miners are killing our fish. They're killing the animals that we hunt, and this is impacting our Yanomami indigenous lands. So, my dear partners, our female warriors, let's join forces and to fight so we can live the way that our ancestors lived. They fought for us to be able to live in peace, and that's what we want. We all want to live in peace. So I want this Brazilian government that it respects all us indigenous people. Let us live in peace. If the government was elected by us, then the land that has been demarcated, the government should respect that. They should not do these things with us. It's supposed to be our indigenous people, but they have no idea what we are facing in our own territories. This is a bit about what I would like, because very bad. worried. Women, girls that are just 10, 14 years old that are getting pregnant from the wildcat miners. And this should not happen. It's very, very bad. When I see my sisters, our young girls being pregnant at such a young age, I feel very, very sad for them. When I hear them crying about what's happened, it makes me very sad. So the government needs to see the suffering that we're going through. We're all suffering. But they have this beautiful speech as if everything's okay. But no, we are suffering. We want respect. When they came to our land, they spoke very well. We had hoped that things would get better, but no, things are getting worse. They said that if Indigenous people, that nobody would do any harm to us. And so in front of all my sisters, he spoke very beautifully and made lots of promises, but until now he's not fulfilled any of his promises. And they should, because our land has been demarcated and it's law. The government has made this law, and it's not respecting its own commitments and responsibilities. We are human beings, and the life of each of us is important. We are human beings that think, human beings that need to live. So that's it, my dear partners, my female warriors that are following us in this live. This is what I'd like to share from an Indigenous leading woman who's suffering together with her people. Thank you a lot, Erika. That's it, Alessandra, Mayao, the warriors. We've spoken before a bit about the wildcat mining. Thanks a lot, Erika. There are a few questions in the chat which are being allocated to you. After we hear more, we will pass the microphone back to you so you can reply to them. So I'll pass on first to Juma Shipaya. She's the first female leader of her people. She's a leader who defends indigenous lands and the other traditional territories in the Terra do Meio. And she's the president of an articulation, a commercial articulation for the protection of the Terra do Meio. And she's also studying medicine in the Federal University of Pará. Juma, this microphone is with you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Viviane. I'd like to welcome and greet all the leaders here present. It's an honor for me to be here with so many strong women, warriors who resist in yet another debate to talk about mining, about the violations of our rights. And it's always, despite all the complexity of these impacts, which Alessandra and Eric have already touched upon, talked about, it's impossible not to feel the impacts. It's impossible to not continue the resistance. And the sensation is present. These impacts and the violation of the rights of indigenous peoples and of the territories is this, this worry about until when do we need to suffer this? What more do we need to do? How much more do we have to suffer? I wonder about this every day, and I still don't understand. Not just about the violations of the bills that the Brazilian government has proposed, this genocidal package of bills that will damage us a lot. And so it's these governors, the government has made it quite clear what its intentions are, and they have complied with what they promised. The president is fulfilling his role of genocide of indigenous people, of intimidation of indigenous people. When you look at indigenous territories, all of them, Yanomami, Kayapa, they're all suffering. The Guarani, Babao, the Surui, Paracana, they're all being burned. And that's why I'm not only gonna talk about the government, but also I'm also talking for other countries that need to have the responsibility. They also need to take their responsibility just as much as the Brazilian government about the impacts. Because if this mining exists within the indigenous territories, including the demarcated ones, it's because there's finance for this. And it's not the people who are financing, who are mining, who are inside our indigenous territories. They're not the ones who are financing this. There are big banks, international ones, national ones, that are financing this exploitation, that are financing, that are opening the doors for into the indigenous territories. It's not just the wildcat mining; it's also prostitution. There's the loggers. They're all violating our peoples. So these governments of other countries, they also need to take responsibility just as much as our genocidal Brazil. Belusan is a Canadian company. It's the biggest. It will make the biggest gold mine, in open pit mine in Brazil. That's Belusan and built next to Belo Monte. We haven't even, if you think about overcoming the impacts, we are still suffering from the impacts of Belo Monte, the hydroelectric dam that was built, and now this new project is coming. Belusan, a Canadian company. The Brazilian legislation is very flexible the, about mining, whether it's legal or illegal. There are now many bills that make it even more flexible, that make it easier for our territories to be exploited by miners. Attacks. So we're being attacked by these different bills we're being attacked by the Brazilian government, but also other governments, and we need to talk about this, and they need to be held responsible. And the UN needs to take a position on this. The world needs to take a position. We cannot ignore. We cannot just be speaking among us and just say that it's a Brazilian responsibility. It's also a responsibility of other countries. What's happening within the Yanomami indigenous lands, in Kayapo, in Shipai, and other lands. Erica said something very important, because I wonder every day, when will we have peace? When can we raise our children within our territory in peace? When will we be able to drink our sacred water and eat our sacred foods within our territories? If everything's being contaminated, when the women, for example, Munduruku, they're having problems in getting pregnant. So there's no point to just be talking about these plans in the future, 2030, 2040, 2050. We need something, we need action now. What are you doing now? What can we do now? Because just as there is, we cannot continue to protect these territories, fighting constantly, having setting up our resistance. If we don't have some kind of protection, if there's no protection for the leaders, if there's no protection for the women, this is extremely important. We could make people that murdered, and we wonder every day who will be the next. Paulinho, Guajajara, Arei, Uruiwawau, Dorothy, Dema, Chico Mendes, Dom, and Bruno, and so many others. So many others, and still there on this list, there are people who were defending a territory, who were defending the planet as a whole, who were taken away with violence from the struggles, from their families, from their children, from their partners. I was going to my village when I received the news about Bruno and Don. They were missing initially. I got this cold feeling in my stomach, this anger, this feeling like I don't want to believe that this is happening. And unfortunately, it did happen. And it's not really news. All the threats and denunciations were ignored, just like many, many others are being ignored still today. So we need to discuss about protection of leaders, protection of people, because they're silencing us, they're killing us. They're taking away our children, they're raping our women and children and girls. And sometimes people are far away in Sao Paulo or in other places. You might not get a good, you might not understand what yourself in the shoes of of us. We're women, we're mothers, we're not just leaders, we have many different roles, and we often don't have time for ourselves. We live not just for our people and our community, but we're living this planetary struggle. Defending the Amazon means defending the world. It's defending this diversity, biodiversity that we have, and this is essential work for our planet. So we need urgently not just understanding and notes and support. We need action. We need justice. We need collective planetary support. We need commitment from other people, from other organizations, from other countries. Commitment not just to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, not just to protect the standing forest, but especially with indigenous people, with traditional communities alive, with the Xingu, the Tapajós, or a small river, with the mangroves, with the Amazon, with the Cerrado. If we don't understand that this is a collective struggle, we will target it. So we need this commitment. We need to be in this struggle in a collective way. People need to be held responsible. Our ways of life, our science, our economy, our healthcare needs to be respected and it needs to be supported. Our solutions are being ignored. Our knowledge need to be respected and supported. So to finalize, we can't speak about the Amazon, about the violation of the rights of indigenous peoples without our participation. It's the participation of indigenous and traditional communities is essential because they're suffering. We are suffering. And we need action now. Thank you, Joma. We have been receiving many questions here for all of our speakers. There's a huge interest in understanding the importance of the women indigenous leaders and their associations and movements in the protection of indigenous territories. So when we finalize this first round, we'll pass the word again to answer these questions. But now I'll pass the word to Angela Cachoyana, who's part of COIAB, the Coordination of Indigenous Peoples of the Brazilian Amazon, one of the oldest and largest indigenous associations in Brazil and in the Amazon basin as a whole. Angela is part of this first executive committee of women. She studied business administration. She has a PhD in environmental management. Angela, I would like to pass on the word to you, and then we'll do a closure of this first round. Good morning, everyone. I would like to greet the women who spoke before me, who spoke with a lot of emotion and challenge about what it means to live for the women, for indigenous women to live in this Brazilian Amazon context. They were very good about pointing this. Both Alessandra, Eric, and Juma are very eloquent. So I'd like to do the inverse of what many people often do about different topics and problems, especially in the Amazon. In asking the question to indigenous people, I think the process needs to be inverted. We indigenous people, we have to start making more questions for the Brazilian society, for the world society, about its responsibilities. I think these are some reflections that I would like to raise here, based on what's already been discussed here. It's very serious, very unhuman. These points that Erica and Juma and Alessandra mentioned don't shock anyone. If they don't shock anyone, then something is very, very wrong in society. Some of the points, when we talk about the impacts of mining within demarcated indigenous lands, it's important to amplify that it's not just because an indigenous territory is not demarcated that it has no rights, because our reflection is what we want to question here is that all indigenous lands, independently of whether they have been fully demarcated by the state or not, indigenous territories are precede any official recognition by the state. The first point is that we don't need to wait for someone to recognize our land. Our and it precedes this. Unfortunately, they have not made a big difference in the guaranteeing our rights. So it's important to mention that mining within indigenous lands, whether demarcated or not, or even if they have no any kind of recognition, they're equally as serious and impactful. It's important to mention this because we're talking about the homes of people. We're talking about lives. We're talking about our neighbors. We're talking about the human aspects. There's a situation of a disastrous situation. It's environmental. It's of humanity, and we want people to have empathy with the situation. What Erica mentioned, which is so scary, that children between 9 and 15 are being raped. They're being forced to get by people who violate them. If that doesn't affect you, if that doesn't touch you, then the world is very wrong. There's something very wrong. And when we talk about the responsibilities of the state, federal, at state level or municipal level, it's important to hold the entire society responsible. It's important to those people that create demand for this market need to be held responsible. It's not just the state government, the federal government. There is who is demanding, who's creating a market, who are the people that consume the end products, who is making this pressure. We have to get out responsibility by reducing the life of those who are defending the territories. It's the right of girls to continue living as indigenous girls, as indigenous women. That's what we're talking about. And we're not talking about something that's unreal. We're talking about lives that are being violated, that are being interrupted by a demand, by a greed that is brought by society. Society is consuming these products. it's the main responsible for these impacts, because the state and the companies, they are responding to a demand, and we have to tell people that they need to take responsibility for their role as human beings and make this and reflect about what your demands, your vanity, your richness, what impact it's happening. That it's killing lives, it's stopping the life of children. And when we talk about violence, it seems very minimized. Last week there was a very grave situation of a child of 11 years old that had been raped, and there was discussion about abortion, and that shocked society. And but what about the 9-year-old Yanomami girls that are being raped? That doesn't shock society. What's the difference? What's the difference of the life of the indigenous lives and the non-indigenous girls? We need to reflect about this. We need to discuss more about this. Another discussion point is that we need to discuss that society needs to stop to outsource its responsibility. We, indigenous people, we, indigenous women, we are not the only ones responsible for defending and fighting, which is something that is benefiting the whole of the world. It's protection of indigenous lands and the forest. But we are fighting to protect humanity, and we have to get out of this scene where we're always outsourcing this responsibility to others regarding the violence that is impacting the right of peoples. So I bring this reflection into this discussion about holding responsible different actors. We need to look beyond just the government, the federal government, which is responsible, but it's the whole of society. The society that has this need and greed for richness, for consumption, that have a price of lives, that leads to sexual abuse of girls and women. And within this topic about what are the social impacts that this activity has, this violence has among the indigenous people, it goes way beyond the destructuring, the disarticulation of indigenous communities. It's been causing conflicts within indigenous peoples. But it's worse. We're seeing the creation of factions within the indigenous people of gangs. There is the polluted rivers is really, that's very serious, because where are we going to get water from? How will we survive if we don't? If we depend on the river and its water for food and for water, but communities are also losing their peace because of these gangs that are being created within the indigenous territory. They corrupt teachers. They're corrupting people that work with healthcare, and they've always been there fighting for indigenous lands. But what happens when they start being corrupted and co-opted? We have to discuss this more and reflect about different impacts. They go way beyond about what we can transmit as women, indigenous women. And it's time for this. This fight should not be only the fight of indigenous women. If the men are not are not willing to fight for life, for women, for children, then we women of Brazilian society need to unite to do this, so that we can protect the rights of our girls to be girls and not suffer this daily violence as is happening currently in all indigenous territories. And here we have some very emblematic territories being represented in this call. There's the situation of the Yanomami, Kayapo, of the Xingu River, but unfortunately the entire Amazon is being contaminated, and we need to stop discussing so much and implement actions. And we women should call upon society to assume its responsibility, that the Brazilian state has to assume its responsibilities and must guarantee that the indigenous territories are protected and that our lives are protected. So when we come to a dialogue space like this, we also have to call on this bigger responsibility. This, and to finalize the pressure of the market, if if the Brazilian state had more clarity about the impacts, and that to attend the market you're killing part of the population, there wouldn't be this huge attack on indigenous territories. But within this context of this event that the UN is part of, it's important to also discuss that international markets responsible for these impacts, that the minerals are not being monitored, and there's no good traceability of these materials, of these minerals, to guarantee that they're not coming from conflict areas. So the international markets, the countries from Europe, from other countries, they are also responsible for the deaths of indigenous people in Brazil. You are responsible for the violence against Yanomami girls, against girls from the Munduruku, Kayapa. If this does not hurt you, if it doesn't impact you, then we really need to review our concepts as humanity. So I want to bring this reflection that let's not ask more questions to us, but we want to ask questions to you. What's your responsibility for the protection of our territories? What is your participation? What is your responsibility that you have to adopt? So this is my reflection. I hope that in the next debates we can invert this reality of who asks the questions. Thank you very much, Angela. I think it's a great speech, and it's very much in the spirit of this meeting here. So we now finalize the first round of presentations. There are now 4 questions in the chat, and I will pose the questions here. All the questions have been shared with all the speakers, so please feel free to comment on all of them. So the first question is about the way and the acceptance of the indigenous man, about the organization of indigenous women within their villages. There's a question by Antenor, but there are several questions about the importance of having women in the organizations and the fight for indigenous rights. Another question was by Louisa. It's about the threats, and asking if you could talk a little bit more about the threats that you're suffering for being on the front lines in defending territories. It also involves your families, and yeah, that's a broader context. Priscilla Jacques made a question during Angela's speech. which is, could you share which are the actions that have been taken in the sense of, Priscilla was talking about the the protection of territories by Indigenous women organizations, and how can Brazilian society support these activities? And finally, there is another question from Louisa, and it's about co-optation. If you could comment about this phenomenon that's happening. If you can comment about how this happens and which impact it has, and how you women are seeing this. These are the questions. I think we could do a new round. I'll pass the word to Alessandra, and then we follow the sequence that we did in the first round. Alessandra? The floor is yours, Alessandra. The women, in our case, for example, when we organize a meeting for youth or a meeting for women, we only put it's only in the name it's for women, but everybody participates. The elders, the warriors, the leaders. It's not just the women, because we can't exclude our children, our sons, grandfathers. They're men. They participate and they learn with the women, and that's very important because they're also learning. We also we learn with them and they learn with us. We learn from the children when we ask them, for example, about, for example, they say it's garbage. Like when you ask what is the impact that mining has, and they say it's all the garbage. So the participation of the whole of society, of the women, the elderly, the children, is very important. It's very rich that they all participate and we exchange this knowledge. And we can't exclude the men. We have to be side by side of the men. We don't want to take the place of anyone. We want to join forces. We want to strengthen our struggle that we do together. This individualism is who invents that is man who divides territory and creates slaves and creates these systems. But we respect our elders, we respect our children, our women, our wise men. They're all participating, talking about the problems, but also about our wins, the battles that we do win. So there's a lot of there are also problems, but there are also they also we also progress in certain things, and we need to celebrate that. What was the other question? There was a question about how the threats that the women leaders are receiving, how do these threats impact the lives of your families, of your relationships within in the community? I often feel threatened. And it's not just my problem. My family, my people, they also cry. Very often we think we might be alone, but we're not alone. Everybody suffers. My mother suffers. My children suffer. My whole community suffers. Every attack that I suffer, they also suffer. Every different people suffer. We see many attacks when when they happen, other people also suffer when we see attacks happening against the Yanomami, the Guarani. We feel the pain because they are our family. It's life that's being impacted. When there are threats, we scream and ask why this violence that people are doing this to us, that they're entering our territories. Sometimes I wonder, like, why was I born like this to fight and defend our territory? Sometimes I'm with youth, and I ask, we we say it's better, there are people who don't do anything, but they clean the house and that's their life. But you're fighting to defend lives, to defend peoples, to defend territories, to defend our rivers, our sacred places, the youth, the women. When we know a bit about our rights, it feels like we live only to defend. So when we receive a threat, it doesn't only affect that person, it affects the whole community, the union of the communities that are there. We are not alone. There are our communities, our people, other peoples. There's the whole forest, a standing forest, and but when it's cut, when you cut a tree, it can still survive because its roots are still there, and it will strengthen the other trees, and it will continue. And we women, we face a lot. I'm one of them. I think there's a little problem with Alessandra's internet. So let's pass on the word to Erika, and when Alessandra is back, she'll be able to voice her. Erika, would you like to comment the question? So there are the questions about the movement of Indigenous women, a question about the threats, and the question about the grooming of Indigenous people. The word is yours, Erika. Sorry, I didn't get the questions because my internet is very slow. Could you please repeat the questions? Of course. Let's try to pass the questions to Erika through the chat so she can prepare the questions and come back. Juma still has internet in Altamira, I think. Juma, if you can comment, and we'll prepare in parallel the questions for Erika. Angela made an excellent summary of everything, because even though it's a life with Indigenous women here, we're not fighting just for Indigenous women. Outside here in the non-Indigenous world, we divide a lot by gender and other ways, but it's important to understand that our Indigenous struggle, it's collective. We don't, it's not divided by gender or territory. We don't talk only for one specific people, like just a Shipai or just a Yanomami. No, it's a very broad way, because the impacts are very often the same, and our essence is collective. But in the last years, the participation of Indigenous women has increased a lot. But that doesn't mean that years before, women were not present in the fight together with the men and the men. Because when you go to face a miner, you go with your child on your arm, and you do it collectively with the men. And this is one of the things that, speaking with other leaders, we have this concern that we don't fall in this way of this individualist way, or this discussion that separates by gender, because we're here together as a collective. We all have this responsibility, and we should not individualize this and each fight for their own rights. It needs to be collective. It's not, it's our fight. It's the resistance of the Indigenous people, the protection of the Indigenous, of the Amazon forest, is not just the responsibility of Indigenous people. It has to be responsibility of the whole society. And this has costed us lives. And I can't say that these threats, that they're only for Indigenous people. In the list that I read up of people that have been murdered, there are Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. There are people that are just for being activists and fighting for Indigenous rights. Whether Indigenous or not, they're being seen as a threat, and they're receiving threats. And any person that opposes this genocidal, oppressive, and destructive model will probably get these threats. It's not. It's the destruction of the forest, but also of the extermination of all the people who stand up and protect the forest. But this also happens in the favelas, in the shanty towns, where children and women are also being attacked and suffer violence. This model that kills and that co-opts and that destroys. It happens within Indigenous territories, but also in the urban areas, within schools, within the Quilombola areas, within the extractive reserves, within the ecological stations. It has very broad impacts. We have to look at this violent process in a holistic way. The pain of a Yanomami woman is also my pain. The pain of a mother that loses her child in the favela, that's also my pain. The pain of a child that's being raped, that's also our pain. If we don't care about the others, it's hard to live on this planet, because we're all living in the same place, and we have to care about it, not just about yours, but for everyone, for all of us. So this process of violence, and specifically violence against women. I was the first female leader from my people. One of the impact was related to machism, patriarchy, not so much within the community, but especially from people from outside. For example, when a company arrives in our community, they want to speak to the leader. They say, I want to speak to the leader. And I said, well, I'm the leader. And they say, no, but I want to speak to the leader. And they don't respect me as a woman. And I told them, you have to speak with me because I'm the one who's leading. So there's this gender violence, which is not just within the community, but it's especially from outside where people don't respect us. We can't forget this violent context, which is the co-option and grooming of leaders, the famous divide and conquer. They arrive with merchandise, with boats, they bring a lot of cachaça, with drugs, guns. This whole package that they bring along to try to co-opt, to try to cheat, and to try to divide the community. And it happens, unfortunately, it happens. This causes a lot of internal conflicts. We get creation of new communities because they split. There is violence against women and children. It brings conflict, not just internal, but also broader. The protection of the whole territory is weakened, and you get more vulnerable every time and exposed to threats, which is the example of Belo Monte, this hydroelectric dam that I spoke about. I can give another example of Altamira, where many other communities showed what not to do, what doesn't work, which is this model of co-optation that is being used within these big infrastructure projects where there's no real free, prior, and informed consent process. And from that process onwards, it only got worse. And when you're a leader, a female leader, you don't have vacation. There are no weekends. There's no time off. You are 24 hours available, on alert, defending all our rights, not just the territory, but education, healthcare. And this brings consequences when you don't accept, when you buy a fight, when you refuse to sign an agreement with a company, when you don't participate in the cooptation process, when you don't submit to that, then you become a problem. And people say Altamira it's a mind field. It's not. You're not working on eggshells. You're walking on dynamite, and it's this very destructive, especially psychologically. One of the things that we don't talk about a lot about mental health of Indigenous people, of the Indigenous leaders, of the Indigenous youth and children. But these big projects, they impact our mental health a lot. It reaches the point that you receive threats and you have to leave, you have to take your children away. Imagine a mother having to send her children away to protect them. Imagine being physically attacked. All these forms of violence. Because there's many people are afraid of denouncing what they're suffering. There are people who are afraid to come to my house, for example, because of threats. And as Alessandra said, the threat that we receive is not just to us personally, it's extended to our family, to our children, to other people who are close to us. And you get worried because if I can't guarantee my own safety, how can I guarantee the safety of my family, of my community? How will we continue protecting our territories if we don't have protection for our own lives? And we need to discuss about the protection for leaders, for women, all the harassment, the intimidation that we suffer. Often there are people who cause this violence, these threats, that pay others to threaten us. We have to talk more about the protection of us so that we can continue to participate in lives like this one. If it's important to have more protections, to bring more women to the struggle, because not everyone can jump, because we talk a lot about the protection of the territories, but we forget to talk about the protection of the people who are defending rights. We women, we are defending our territories as we women, and we end up being a mother for the whole issue. We need to divide this responsibility, and that's why we are calling upon society to join us, to share this responsibility. We're asking for human beings to feel empathy, to support, and we're talking about the government and the bills that are trying to. Also talking about big multinational companies that are trying to destroy us, and they're the financiers, but the biggest financiers are consumers. There's no point in just holding the big companies responsible, but who buys is just as responsible. There's no point in saying, oh, I defend the Amazon, but then eat a lot of meat. If you're buying gold, then you're also responsible for the violence. If we don't change our habits, if you don't change your ways of life and that of your families, you're responsible. You can't just put responsibility on others. We also have responsibilities. So we shouldn't just the mining companies and other society needs to be held responsible, and it has to take the responsibility for its consumption patterns. Not just as citizen, to rethink and analyze and to critically look to the country, party, generations. You're consuming as well. All these miners that are in the different territories we need to be responsible for them. We need to urgently assume responsibility. It's not just, you shouldn't just hear about what we women are saying and congratulate us. and then just continue your life as before. You were saying, and then naturalize the violence. Um, you know, some people are here right now, and then they go to Instagram and follow some other issue, and forget about what we were saying here. We can't ignore. We can't naturalize this violence, the deaths, not only in the context of human rights, of activists, but all the people that went, that passed away during the pandemic. We can't forget. We have to look at that, stop and breathe and think about what we want. What will we do from now on? And we can't put the responsibility of others on others. We have to also think about our own contribution. If you don't want to do it for indigenous people, or if you don't care, if you say, "Oh, I don't live in the Amazon," do it for yourself. Do it for your own family, for your children, independently of where you are, where you live. Everybody can do their part. You don't need to live in the Amazon to do anything. You all you need is responsibility, commitment, and understand that it's a struggle that's all of us. And independently of where you are, you can do your role. We can't stop living our dreams and think about a better future. But we want peace. I hope that one day, in the next generations, don't have to be in this fight for resistance. I want that they will be able to live free. That's the next generations, the next youth, that they don't need to wake up and think about who has been killed now, which territory is being invaded now, and be worried about a new mobilization, a new resistance. I hope that they will be able to live, because today we only resist every day, all types of violence. And I hope that peoples, not just indigenous, traditional communities, all that we'll be able to live in peace in our territories, with our ways of life. Thank you very much, Juma. Angela precisa outro compromisso. Angela needs to go to another commitment. Thank you very much for your participation. So I'd like to pass on the word to Angela so she can make her final remarks. And please answer any other questions that have been posed in the chat. Thank you. I'm sorry. There were 4 questions. I'd just like to comment a little bit. Many have been answered by Juma, by Alessandra. So I'd like to comment on the women organization. How is that seen? It's very different and relative for each territory and each people. This process of women representative organization, it's a process that in many territories is being built together with men. I'm from Orixamina in the north of Pará, which is one of the regions in Pará that has one of the highest concentrations of mining. We have an organization, a social organization that fights for the right of indigenous peoples. We haven't segmented this fight. So, as I say, it's very relative. There are regions that have advanced this representative organization that joins forces. But when the moment comes where we need to have a women organization, it will be to join forces in the protection of rights. I think Schumann mentioned that, say that when we fight, we don't fight just for men, women or just for men, we fight together. On the question how society can support this fight, Jum also mentioned this, that from the moment that you start demanding changes in your consumption pattern, that's very important. We cannot continue to consume meat from beef that comes from deforestation in the Amazon. We need to demand, ask about where it comes from. Where do these products come from? That's a starting point. That's a responsibility of society to know what you're consuming and where is it coming from. When we start demanding from the companies and from the state information that and the assurance that the products that are being offered to us, that they come from a legal supply chain, and that it has not violated our rights, that will be very important and can change the scenery. That's a starting point for how society can support the resistance of indigenous peoples. It's important to bring society to this struggle, to discuss the protection of the Amazon. It's not just a struggle of the indigenous peoples, it's a struggle of all of us. About the threats against us, it's very sensitive, very complicated. I can't talk about this without getting emotional. Many of us, probably all of us, are being threatened. In my case, it's the threats that I receive. They impact me, but they impact my family the most. The threats often don't come directly to the person that's being threatened, but they come through someone who's close to you, your brothers or sisters. In my case, my sister and my mother. Recently, my mother had to leave from where she was living for 25 years, because she was receiving threats daily because of my activities in the protection of the territory. So this impacts our lives and destructures our families, and it interferes in many ways in your mental health, in your physical health. It's a way to try to weaken us and to ensure we stop doing what we're doing. But and the protecting lives and protecting the forest is seen by them as something bad. It's it's difficult for me to fully comment on this. I've been passing this situation recently. I'm a member of the executive committee of COIAB, and I haven't been exposing myself a lot to also protect my family. And the other thing is about the participation of women in these movements. In reality, it's the inverse. It's not there is participation of women. The women are making this movement so that the men can participate. It's a movement that's very strongly led by women. They're driving this movement to be in front of this struggle. It's a very important struggle that these women in these spaces and will make a difference, and it will join forces with others like Joana Wapishana has discussed this, and we need more Joanas, we need more Indigenous women as mayors, as participating in local governments, and that will be able to, that way we can change some of the realities in our territories. We should, politics should be brought to the community, and this is something that's being led by women, and we hope to include men. And this should be something that's become more common within the politics of party politics. So I'd like to thank you for this debate. This debate needs to continue. I brought some points about the reflections that we all need to do about, as people, as a society, that we cannot continue to outsource the responsibility, that each of us needs to assume which attitude, which action each of us can take, is question where the products that we consume come from. And that will be able to put a break on the violence against young girls, against deforestation, the pollution of our rivers, the cooptation of our leaders. This is a process that we need to start urgently. If we don't start now, we can't carry this responsibility by ourselves. We all need to support the struggle. A big hug to all the women here that are here participating from different places in the Amazon. Thank you, Angela. It was really great, your participation. It was very important that you were here to represent COIAB, which is an umbrella organization for the whole Amazon. And here we have people from different places, from Santarém, Manaus, and other places, from Amazon to Geneva. So thank you very much for participating. Finally, Angela has been able to get a good connection. Maya also got a good connection. Maya has a master in rights, in law, of the University of Federal University of Pará. She's been part of this, participating in this movement since a child. She's the daughter of an important leader who was part of the discussions and discussions around the Constitution of 1988. Also like to say that Maya is a pre-candidate to a federal deputy for the state of Pará for the party sustainability network, Rede de Sustentabilidade. Maya, I'll pass the word to you, and then we'll close with some of the questions that were shared in the chat about the role of women in the protection of rights and the rights of Indigenous women, the impacts on others of the threats that you receive, that the women receive, and the third question, more about cooptation and grooming processes that are happening within the territories that are being invaded by minors. Maya, the words with you. I'd like to thank you for the invitation. My flight was late, so I'm going to Indigenous community of the Kayapo to talk about Indigenous rights, about our rights, the rights of our constitution, about 169 convention. So it's an important moment that we are passing in together with women. I just came out of a meeting with women. It's the first meeting in the La Casa Indigenous lands. And even from far, I'd like to send a hug to all the speakers. We've been meeting a lot in these moments of fights, of struggles. We have been we've been strengthening and joining forces, because every time we meet, we talk a lot, we have ideas. So I think it's a very important moment for us women in this very important struggle. The wildcat mining, especially in the Kayapo Indigenous territory, this started before the 80s, because this colonization process in the beginning of the in the south of Para. We started together with my friends and my parents. We started fighting for our indigenous land even before it was demarcated. So it's been a very long struggle. The region was already being seen as a region that was very had a lot of potential for mining, but also for timber. So from that moment on, we've been fighting. And I grew up realizing that education starts in the forest. It starts in our territories with the learnings of our elders, the learnings from our women. I learned with my aunts and my grandmothers, and that's been very important. And from that, me and my sisters, we left so we could study in the cities. My father incentivized us a lot, because he had this vision that to prepare his daughters to come back and fight, was a legacy that he left. It was very important that he had this vision. When I joined this live today, I heard Angela talking about the threats, about the types of threats that basically everybody that is participating in this struggle is suffering. And I grew up, in reality, just me and my sisters. We've, as from very young age, we've also always been had to be very careful. Had to be careful about the way we took to school, because my father was already participating in these struggles. So from that moment on, we've been starting to be careful about all types of situations. And this moment now that we're struggling within our territories, we also suffer. And I've been taught that the people, the women, and especially those that denounce and that are in the front protection, because places we need to be fighting, but we need safety. We need support to be able to protect, because we're being threatened. Our families, our children, our family, the closest one, suffers the most. So I hope about these issues. We've seen many threats. We saw the recent case of Don Phillips and Bruno, that everybody daily is suffering these types of threats in our territory to enter there are you see wildcat miners, so you have to pass it, and we suffer threats when we pass there, and especially we women. Speaking a bit more about our organization as women, from the fact that women, especially women from grassroots, from the women that are in the villages, are starting to question. They're saying the men are going out a lot, but we want to see more result, and we want to join forces, and we also want to be in these spaces. And from that, the women from my people have been going out a lot more, going to indigenous camps, to marches, to other movements, because we're observing that we need to participate and get in the fight to protect our land. And I think that within that we're fighting for, I think that we talk about the destruction, but within the destruction in our territories, there's a lot of violence against women, cases of rape, safety, many cases of alcoholism, many cases of drug dependencies. So from the moment that we start discussing this, especially from a female perspective, we go far beyond discussing the destruction of the forest. We also discuss the gravity of the impacts on the community. It's about how we're losing our rivers, our trees, our animals, our food, but we're also losing lives to alcoholism. And we're losing lives to other situations that these miners are bringing. There are many factors that are part of this situation, because beyond the devastation, there's a division. My father always said that things of the Kubein, the non-indigenous people, the materials that they have, they're dividing our people. Part of the communities want to, they want to bring this division, this internal fights, and this causes a very bad situation within our communities, within our villages. We've been speaking a lot with other communities, especially relating to the pre-candidature. This brought a very important dialogue with the communities that want to dialogue, that are asking for help. So this is something we've been doing. We've been talking with these communities to hear from them, because we need to create strategies how to help, how to support, and how to guarantee that our rights are being respected. This is a very important moment for all of us. It's a moment in which we women especially are in the front lines, and we're fighting this fight. And we need support to do this outside of our territory. but we also have the support of the women that are here in our villages, that are protecting us and fighting together with us. So I think it's a very important moment that I see as a transformation. The women of my people, they said, we want to participate. We want to participate in all these movements in the city. We want to participate in the monitoring of projects because we want to see results. We want this for our children, for our grandchildren. So there's a very important participation of women. It was a very important meeting. Tuira was my aunt. She was there. She was singing. So it was a moment that I really observed and understood the internal movement that's transcending boundaries. It's transcending the boundaries of the community. I realized that the women are are going out of their communities to join forces to strengthen this movement that we're fighting now, especially in this political moment in which we need to occupy these very important spaces, because it's in these spaces that they're negotiating bills. They're not only negotiating, they're creating these new bills that are trying to take our territory away. So it's a moment which I'm following very closely with the women, and it's a very important moment. We still have a lot of struggle ahead of us, but with the strength of the chanting women, and with the strength of other peoples, and with the union that we have, we'll be able to achieve our objectives. As Alessandra also mentioned, the union of peoples is very important. We need to be together in this struggle. So I think I touch upon some points relating to this topic. Also because of the noise here at the airport. I'm not sure if you can hear me well. And I think we need to broaden this discussion about the impacts on the lives of women. We see that there's a lot of mercury in the rivers, but we also have to discuss the social impacts, discuss the issues with the excessive use of alcohol, our healthcare. We have been leaving the healthcare topic a little bit on the side within this context of mining, because healthcare is also very important to assure many rights within this context. And what is Indigenous healthcare system doing right now? There are several cases so we need to find partners to do these studies in relation to certain diseases. We need the Indigenous healthcare system to be on our side and to support our struggles in many more serious cases of infant mortality and mortalities during pregnancy. All these impacts the life of women, impacts the bodies of women, because they're the first ones who are being affected. We need to stress this responsibility of the healthcare system enough. Today I see that there stepping aside and keeping their distance to this debate. They haven't been speaking a lot about the impacts of wildcat mining on health of people. And we should discuss this much more. The impacts, we should talk about the impacts on the forest, but also the social impacts and impacts on indigenous health. This is what I'd like to say. I hope I contributed to the debate. I still have a little time here at the airport, so I didn't catch the questions, but I'll be here if there are any questions. My flight leaving still answer some questions until then. Thank you, Maya. We thank you. So we now have a few minutes left to finalize our live of 2 hours. I'd like to pass on the word to Erica, and she's been having lots of troubles to keep her internet connection going in San Gabriel. So I'd like to ask Erica to finalize her comments. Good morning again. What Alessandra said that about the men, what is happening today in my region is what's happening where I participate in meetings. I see a lot I see the women don't have enough strength, but men need to stand together with women. The problems that arrive in our territories are caused by men, so men need to be together with us. That's the only way we can join our forces. That's why it's us women, Yanomami indigenous women. We are very we are the distance in our politics. So I want to strengthen the politics of indigenous, of the Yanomami women, because today my people, many don't care. Many don't care about the problems that we are facing. It's as if they don't think it's important. That's why it's important that leaders join forces, that we include the youth, our children. I'd like everybody to understand that that's our politics, because I get very sad with the Yanomami women. It's just me speaking in front, and I feel that many of the men don't like that, don't like me to speak about the mining within. To receive these threats from my own people who are questioning why I speak about mining. That should not happen. I feel very sad, but I won't let it bring me down. I will continue fighting. I will speak more and more, strengthen my political participation together with my fellow female leaders and the men that are joining forces with us. So I see a lot of men that don't seem to care a lot about us. They came with us women. They were made by women. Don't need to value women more. Just like our ancestors were doing with women. We need they have been women have been rejected by men, but nowadays, why do they have power? If they were mistreated by men, the, we are in a modern time now. The times, ancestral times, they're gone. Today, we need the men to be together with us. We need the youth to join forces. Some of the youth are supporting the minors, but they need to be joining us. If we can't join forces together with the men and with the youth, we will continue to have problems. So we need to be together. We have just one struggle. It's a joint struggle. As a female Yanomami leader, I'm very worried about the future, how we will survive in the struggle. So my fellow female warriors, I see a lot of women complaining, suffering. I see my female fellow women suffering from the violence that the miners are bringing. The impacts are fatal. What's happening in Indigenous lands, and we need the strength of the man to support us. It's a minority that can struggle, but it's a very big problem. We can solve it, but just but just it can't be just me. I want all my people, all the Yanomami to join forces. That's what I want. When I try to strengthen their voices, they don't care. This happens a lot in the meetings where Alessandra was, where Mayal was. You saw the women. Some have they don't have the courage to speak about the problems they're facing. It's very sad, but I want them to understand this politics. But I, as a representative of them, I'm struggling. I will always defend my people, the Yanomami. I will always be together with you because our fight is one fight. It's a joint fight. Our territory is unique. This is what's happening in the Yanomami lands. The problem is very serious, really. People who are not seeing, that are not going to the Yanomami lands, they don't care. They think that indigenous people are living well, but we're not. We're not living well. We're suffering, especially we indigenous people. And nobody cares about our lives, but our lives are very valuable. This is why we're together, to join forces, to fight. More and more, I will strengthen my women. I will always be together with them. In a few days, they, they will understand, and little by little, I'll be strengthening them. So I, as responsible, I want I want to be join forces and travel with you, Alessandra and Mayal. And who you're hearing speaking here is a woman who's living in the forest, leader of our people. We are suffering. We're asking for help. That's it. My my partners, my female fellow warriors, who brings the problem are the men. I never heard of someone saying that a woman brought a problem. All us women should um, congratulate ourselves because we know how to care for our children, for our partners. We are very concerned about uh, our children. For example, when our children get sick, who worries about them? It's us. That's why we are worried. And together we can solve these problems that are affecting our territories. So that's it. Well, let's continue discussion. This is not our fight won't end here. We will stop here. We will continue together, strong and firm. And I'd like to thank for the opportunity to participate and speak to the whole world. Thank you, Erika. Thanks a lot for insisting, despite all the internet problems in São Gabriel da Cachoeira. So maybe we can end our live here today. Of course, the problem is very serious. I think that was very clear that the responsibility to solve this, the issue of illegal invasions and illegal mining, lies with all of us, the states, the companies, and society. And the indigenous women who participated today left a very simple question for us as society. When will we have peace to raise our children? That's what's at stake. And the problem of mining within indigenous territories is not a problem of the indigenous people, it's a problem of the whole of society. In name of the RCA, the participation of all of you, thank you, the UN and the Council of Human Rights. Thank you very much.